All right, guys, hello, welcome. Today, I'm going to talk about the Dust Bowl. Now, I did this presentation for my geography class, so we'll just get right into it. So, we have the Dust Bowl here, and the reason that I decided to do this presentation was mainly because I saw the movie Interstellar, and I thought it was pretty cool with all the dust. If you've seen the movie, you understand what I'm talking about. So, that was kind of what inspired me to do this. So the presentation preview will be first I'll talk about the Great Depression, which kind of led into this and kind of was happening at the same time to just further make things more bleak than it first seemed over in the Midwest. Then I'll talk about what the Dust Bowl actually was. Then we'll get to the Great Plains, which is the area that this took place. Why did the Dust Bowl happen? That's pretty key. Black Sunday, which is kind of like, it's like a storm that happened, as you'll find out. The Soil Conservation Service was put into place, and then I will end with some interesting facts. So let's just jump right into this. So the Great Depression, it went from 1929 to 1939. And it was primarily caused by the stock market crash on October 24th, 1929. And it was referred to as Black Thursday. And pretty much the reason that it crashed was because people panicked. They lost faith in the companies and the manufacturers and the factories making products. And so they sold all their stocks and they held on to their money, and it caused just sheer panic. And this went on for like a decade, as you see, and World War II was what brought us out of it for sure, because that caused all the factories to go back into full production. Women were given jobs. It was just, that was key now. So, and today it was the deepest and longest lasting economic downturn. So it was basically the worst example of this kind of thing that we've had so far. Now, some would say we are in a recession right now, and it could get this bad, but to date, nothing this bad has happened yet. So, what was the Dust Bowl? As you can see right here, the Dust Bowl took place in that Midwest section, which is, as I zoom in here, it's Denver, Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And the worst of it was in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And it was nicknamed the Dirty 30s by the people living there because it was just, there was dust everywhere. And as I mentioned previously, it happened during the Great Depression period. It affected mainly the Midwest, as I just mentioned. And interesting fact is actually 60% of the population ended up leaving the area. They went over to California to try to find opportunity. But due to the Great Depression, they would get over there and they would find nothing but shanty towns, and just there was no business. So a lot of times they would leave the Dust Bowl only to be confronted with new struggles in the West Side. So it was just a horrible time. So we'll talk about the Great Plains. So as you can see with the picture, it is Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas is what it encompasses. And this actually doesn't show, but it goes up into Canada as well. So about the Great Plains, it is a broad expanse of flatland, prairie, steep, and grassland terrain. It is located in the Midwest, as I have mentioned several times already, and it is mainly used for cattle ranching and dry farming. Dry farming is stuff like olives and just stuff like that. So about the Great Plains, just to continue it, the area is a semi-arid climate, Köppen BSK to be precise on that one, and it receives less than 20 inches of rain annually, so it's a pretty dry area. The area is prone to drought as well, which means you will just have it times where there is no water. But it switches between this, which is an odd thing. Some seasons it'll be really wet, and other seasons it'll be really dry. And this is the biggest thing that contributes to the Dust Bowl later on, is that this area is subject to extremely high winds, okay? So the winds will come in and they just get intense, and you'll find out why this happened in a sec. It's considered a short grass prairie biome. That's what it is at its natural state. And the grass actually helps keep the topsoil down. Early settlers called the area the Great American Desert. So, now we get into why did the Dust Bowl happen? The Dust Bowl basically happened because people came in, they exploited the land, they upturned all the grass, and they turned it into plowed farmland. And like I said before, the grass was kind of what was keeping the topsoil down. So when the topsoil is exposed, these winds can come in and they can wind erode. They can just blow this dust. As you see right here, they just blow this dust right over stuff. And that is actually a farmstead being engulfed by dust. And then we got this sign here, which shows that 16 million acres destroyed in Texas by erosion, okay? So, pretty crazy stuff. So, also, what contributed to this was in the 1930s, like I said, there are wet and dry seasons. This happened to be a very dry season. So they would try to plant crops, and the crops would die very quickly due to the Great Depression as well. They couldn't sell a lot of these crops. So a lot of them would just go to waste, or they would just die due to the dryness. And then again, that would leave the soil open for wind erosion. And due to the lack of precipitation, the soil turned into this like dry, powdery stuff, almost like dust. It was not even really like dirt, like you can see. I mean, it looks like smoke, that picture. And because of the high winds, they swept and scattered the landscape, and that's just what happened. So Black Sunday, this is the one that's infamous. This one occurred on April 14th, 1935. It's still to this day considered one of the worst storms in American history. And it is estimated to have displaced 300 million tons of topsoil from this Great Plains area. And the combination of all of this stuff, drought, erosion, bare soil, and wind, this all contributed to the massive storm. And as you can see right here, this is just an area that has been completely buried by dust after this. I mean, there's like stuff there that you can't even really tell anymore because it's so buried. And then this is just showing how bleak and disgusting these dust storms could become. So, due to all this happening, the Soil Conservation Service was established by then President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he put this into place in 1935. So, he had some incentives in place. So, he would pay farmers to leave the fields idle, and he would encourage them to utilize crop rotation. So, that would help as well. And he also, since it was a prairie grass biome, he told them replant the prairie grass, cover up the soil so it's not getting wind eroded. Starving livestock were bought up to feed to the homeless in the Hoovervilles. Now, the Hoovervilles, like I said, they would go to California, and these were basically shanty towns. They were just homeless zones where people had to live because there was no job, so they were just living in these like makeshift communities, and it was just really, really tough. And in 1994, the name was changed to the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and basically, like I said, this whole thing was just made to just kind of prevent things like this from ever happening again. I mean, that's just the bottom line, okay? So, and just to finish up this presentation, some interesting facts that I learned was the Dust Bowl. The key one here, the Dust Bowl was both man-made and a natural disaster. So it was a natural disaster due to the fact that the area was prone to wind and it was a dry area, but it could have been completely avoided if man hadn't come in and just exploited the land without even thinking, okay? So they just went in, they had no precautions, they just kind of took over the land, and then this happened. So it took years and years of them exploiting this to get to this way, but it happened, and there are many examples of this around the world. And the Dust Bowl's name actually came from a news reporter named Robert Giger, and he just said it in passing, and it just the name kind of stuck. It doesn't make sense why it's called a Dust Bowl. It's not actually a bowl area. And later, Giger actually renamed it to the Dust Belt. So, But the Dust Bowl was the name that just stuck. That's what people called it, and that's what it's known by today. Now this one I thought was pretty cool. Dust storms would actually create mini static electricity storms. So there was a lot of barbed wire around the fences, you know, because they were farms. And these dust storms would come in, and like due to the friction of like the sand hitting the fences, it would cause sparks and little electricity storms to happen, which I thought was pretty interesting. Another thing is the natural ecosystem disruption led to jackrabbit and grasshopper infestations. And now some of these have been reported to be pretty biblical. Like they would come in and they would eat whatever crops are left, even eat dead livestock, stuff like that. I mean, this was like, well, obviously not rabbits, but the grasshoppers. And they just come in and consume everything. So, and then some storms were so bad that they actually reached the East Coast, Washington, D.C., and then even into the Atlantic Ocean. And a funny thing I read was that someone in New York was in there. He reported this during the time when one of them was going over New York. And in New York, they just considered it a minor inconvenience. They didn't know the kind of crap that people were going through in the Midwest. It didn't even pale in comparison. So I thought that was interesting. And the final thing is they were nicknamed black blizzards because these things would literally blot out the sun. I mean, when these things hit, you couldn't see left, you couldn't see right, you couldn't see in front of you, you couldn't see behind you. You were just in like, it was almost like being in a tornado of filth. I mean, you just didn't know where was what, and I'm sure it didn't feel good either. I mean, the sand hitting you. So anyway, these are my sources cited. This was my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time I do one of these. So, see ya.